Well, today, I am tying my talk into the fact that we were actually at the end of Pride Month, LGBTQ, lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, and questioning. I am an ally. Unity of Springfield is an ally. Unity as a whole is an ally. And this talk also has to do with spiritual social action. Unity Worldwide Ministries' vision is centered in God. We co-create a world that works for, let's say it together, all. That leaves no one out, correct? A world that works for everyone. In fact, Unity has it's either a 6 or 7 week small group study on spiritual social action. You know, Jesus was a social activist. Jesus was brave. He was courageous. He let himself be fully seen. He was made fun of. He was humiliated. He was betrayed. But he stayed true to himself, and he stayed true to his message. He was fully in the arena. So spiritual social action is a way for us to put our unity principles into practice. And by putting feet on our faith, we then spiritually evolve ourselves. But by putting feet on our faith, by standing and speaking and living out loud this message, we also help to raise the consciousness all around us. And we are then participating in the spiritual evolution of this planet. Don't you believe that this is the message that our world needs more than anything? Don't you believe that this message that we teach here, this message of love and inclusivity and oneness, this is the message that our world needs to hear? Thank you. Yes, amen. It needs for us to be speaking it, and again, to be standing and living it out loud. And so what is that going to take? It's going to take authenticity through courage and vulnerability, which ultimately leads to our freedom, and it ultimately leads to the freedom of all people. So what I want to start with today, how many of you are familiar with Brené Brown and her work? Okay, good. Well, for those of you who aren't, I really encourage you to YouTube Brené Brown and listen to her TED Talk on vulnerability. It is absolutely amazing. We actually did a 6-week series here on her book called Daring Greatly. And Brené is a professor of research. She is an author and a speaker. And so she did this Call to Courage on Netflix. And I watched this, and we watched it, and we loved it. I'm going to share some of this with you today. So she's all about vulnerability. She studies shame and vulnerability and just being able to be who we are and moving past those things. And she says we have to be vulnerable to be brave and have the courage to really be authentic. This is our mission statement. Every week we talk about being authentically all that we came here to be. How many of you actually saw her first TED Talk on vulnerability? It was pretty amazing, wasn't it? I know that it was one of those things that was pretty life-changing. Well, here's her story. She said that she got a call, she lives in Houston, from the TED people, and they were finally going to get to do the TED Talks in Houston, and they said they wanted her to be the first one. And she said, okay, well, what do you want me to speak about? And they said, you just speak about what you want to. Just go out there and crush it, which was really unusual for them to just say, speak about what you want. So she said, okay. So she and her husband were coming back on a plane from Silicon Valley, where she had just met with CEOs of huge organizations talking about the importance of vulnerability. So she says to her husband, you know what? I'm going to talk about vulnerability. I'm going to be vulnerable. I'm going to get out there and I'm going to show up, and I'm not going to do my regular academia speech. And he was just like, why? And she said, because I just spent 5 days talking to these CEOs. So she does this TED Talk. She puts herself out there. And she said, literally on her drive home, she had vulnerability hangover. And what that meant was that she had somewhat regret for having shared and been so vulnerable and so real in this TED Talk. And what gave her some consolation was that there were only 500 people at this Houston TED Talk. So then she finds out it's on YouTube. And then she finds out it's on the big TED. So she goes to her husband crying and saying, oh my God, we have got to stop this. And he's like, really, Brene, what are people going to do? Are they going to Google Brene Brown vulnerability? Yes, that's the hilarious part of that, is that's exactly what happened. So she says she watches it, and she sees 3 people, 4 people, 5 million, 6 million people. And she said, and she's livid. And she said, on news stations all over the world, they're saying, who is this Bernie Brown? And what is the importance of vulnerability? Why is this so important? And she's like, oh my God. So her husband is leaving for work, and he says to her, Brene, whatever you do, do not go to that computer. Do not look at the comments on that computer. And she says to him, seriously, Steve, I do my work. I'm not going to look at the comments. And she peers out the window as he takes off, making sure that he's gone, and she goes immediately to her computer, and she pulls up the comments. And she said they were horrible. She said, you can study shame, yet you can never be prepared for the cesspool of humanity on social media. And isn't that true? She said at that point in her life, the fear of shame and the fear of criticism was so big in her that she engineered smallness. I want us to hear that again. Her fear of shame and her fear of criticism was so big that she engineered smallness in her life. I get that. I relate to that. She did not take chances, and she did not put herself out there. And she said it wasn't worth it to her to step into her power and play big, because she literally did not know if she could physically take the criticism. That we probably all relate to that, correct? So here are some of the comments, and she said these comments were everything that she had ever feared in her life. 1 was less research, more Botox. 2, of course she embraces imperfection. What choice does she have if you look like her? 3, she should wait and talk about worthiness when she loses 15 pounds. 4, I feel sorry for her husband and children. 5, I hope someone kills her. 6, she is what is wrong with the world today. Those are only a few. And she said she was vacillating between, just suck me up now and let me die, and I am prepared for this. And so she decided she was going to use that mantra that, I'm trained for this moment, I'm trained for this moment, you are in a shame storm, you are trained for this moment. And what came to her was she needed to escape the moment, so she decided to get peanut butter and watch Downton Abbey. Was her escape. She watched Downton Abbey for 7 hours. And she's a researcher, so she says, I get done watching Downton Abbey, and I'm like, I can't face this. So she goes to her computer, and she pulls up things like, where's the Abbey, and who plays this? And then she researches who was the president at that era that Downton Abbey was. So what comes up is Theodore Roosevelt, 1910. And she says that in that moment, she had a total God moment. That it was like God was descending upon her in her living room. The first thing she pulls up on a speech that he had given is this: it is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes up short again and again because there is no effort without error and shortcoming, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. What a God moment that is. This is how God works in our life all the time, and especially when we're open to it. And in fact, what we know is she wrote the book Daring Greatly based on this quote. She said there were three things that came out of that quote for her. The first one was, she said, I am going to live in the arena, I'm going to be brave, and I'm going to take chances. Now remember, she's a researcher. She said there are 400,000 pieces of data that say if you live in the arena, you are going to get your behind kicked. You will fall, you will fail, and you will know heartbreak. She said that when she was in Silicon Valley, one of the CEOs said, I get it, Brene. I get it, and I am willing to fail. And she said, you do not get it. You will fail. You will fall. And you will feel heartbreak. And I'm going to come back to that and tell a story about that in a couple minutes. So every morning when she gets up, she says these words, and I'm going to invite you to say them with me. Today, I will choose courage over comfort. Today, I choose to be brave. The second thing that came out of this quote was everything that she learned about vulnerability. Vulnerability is not about winning or losing. It's having the courage to show up when you cannot control the outcome. That's pretty big, huh? Because it takes courage, right? To show up, to be who you are, to stand for what you know to be true and right, when you have no idea how people are going to react or respond to that, what they're going to say. That's vulnerability. How many of us grew up thinking that vulnerability was a weakness? How many of us, when somebody gets up here and they tell their story, think that they have great courage in telling their story? And that's because vulnerability is courage. There is no weakness in vulnerability, no matter what you've been told in your life. Vulnerability takes great courage. The third thing that came out of this quote for her was, if you are not in the arena getting your behind kicked on occasion because you are being brave, she's not interested in your feedback about her work. And here's why. There are millions of cheap seats in the world today filled with people who will never once step into that arena. They will not once put themselves out there, but they will make it a full-time job to hurl criticism and judgment and throw really hateful things toward us, and we have to get out of the habit of catching them and dissecting them and holding them close to our hearts. She said, don't grab that hurtful stuff from the cheap seats. Don't pull it anywhere close to your heart. Just let it fall to the ground, step over it, and keep on going. You cannot take criticism from people who are not being brave with their own lives, because it will just crush you. So that stuff, get behind me, because you have no power over me. Now that's not easy to do, is it? Because, like 99 people could say something good and one person could say something bad, and where's our attention go? And that's part of what this journey is about. That's the personal and the spiritual journey aspect of this, is really so much sinking at that place of self-love and self-worthiness and self-esteem, that we can finally get to the place where we let that stuff, we get it behind us, because we know that what we have to say matters. We know that how we are living our life, it does make a difference. Okay, so here we are. We are called to be authentically all that we came here to be, to let our light shine, to step out and to step up and to be seen. But dang, that's hard sometimes, huh? I said dang. That's hard sometimes. Because my grandson sometimes says, Grandma, you said a bad word. And I'm like, I didn't. So do we cower back when we're sharing our truth and some far right-wing fundamental Christian starts, doing Bible stuff at us? Do we cower back when we feel like somebody is making fun of us, or something like that? How many of you know Marianne Williamson? Marianne Williamson used to be a Unity minister in Detroit, in case you didn't know that. She is an author, a spiritual teacher. She's also a candidate for president. Yeah, so this is not about politics in the sense of, I'm not endorsing. what I'm saying about Marianne Williamson is that what I want to acknowledge is her courage to get up not only in front of a national audience, but a worldwide audience and be a voice in the darkness. Whether people can hear her message or not, we need to start speaking it and we need to start living it out loud. In her closing statement, she said, "Fear has been harnessed and only love can cast that out. I am going to harness love for political purposes. I will meet you on the field and love will win." Did she get made fun of for that? You bet. Did she have criticism hurled at her? You bet. But she spoke what is our message. And here's the thing, you guys, we have got to start doing that more and more and more. I was so excited. And again, this is not about Marianne Williamson for president. It's not about that. It's that this woman is out there speaking a message that is vital to the health of our nation and to the health of our world. And even if some people can't hear it yet, she's planting seeds. And there's other people who are going, "Oh my gosh, she's speaking something that I agree with." And you know, you look at, what would Jesus do? Love your enemies, do good to those who persecute you, love your neighbor. Love is the answer. And I want to tell you a story about a woman who lives locally. Her name is Michelle Nimmo. And Michelle owns a store in downtown Springfield called the Alchemist Attic. Now, she created that store in an effort to create a space, especially where those who are not even looked at as being human would have a safe space to be seen and acknowledged for who they are. It's a very metaphysical store. It's definitely a store that would be us. So here's what she said, because this woman, she got into the arena. "I'm closing my shop." She's closing her shop, and her last day is July 5th. "Because I, after 3 years of trying to create a safe space, do not feel safe there. I got to see folks trying to incite religious wars in its space or marginalize others in its space for the assertion of their beliefs. My store's mission was to support the exploration of all spiritual beliefs to contribute to world peace." What a mission, huh? Because that is my belief. That is how I honor the God, the goddess, the all that there is. I created that space so that others like me, queer, non-neurotypical, feminists, not this religion or that, artists, poets, for folks who want to explore their relationship with God or even with their own consciousness in safety and in health without being called evil, not human, not deserving of health or protection. I've held and met humans who hold so much trauma and beliefs that they are evil because they don't fit into a Christian hetero norm. Some walk in and just fall on the floor in tears. They curl in a ball like a small child sobbing because one human, one shop, one crazy, too sensitive human said, "I see you, human. I hear you, human. I will protect you, human." My partner and I had to literally call the cops and get in front of a drunk man chasing, threatening bodily harm to gay teenagers. We stood between him and the children as he was going to attack for looking gay. We called the police. I have watched folks find others in my shop who believe like they do, who hear them and see them, and they find community. I'm tired of having to teach white men how they dehumanize others. I'm tired of death threats, worrying if the humans I love so much might be bombed, shot, or assaulted in my space or leaving my space. People keep telling me I'm stupid because I'm losing capital gain. Capital gain be damned. I know I won the capitalist game, but it was never the point. Alchemist Attic was a successful retail store. World peace was the point. She went on to talk about fear for herself, for her family, and her employees, especially since someone with a microphone literally said everyone who goes into Alchemist Attic or works there should be dragged onto the streets and be burned. She called the local police department, and essentially they told her they're not allowed to file reports against the street preacher and his people. And if she didn't like it, she should contact the prosecutor's office. This is a literal death threat. And they wouldn't do anything about it. There was a local minister who for months, who works for the city, threatened to shut her store down and change her business license because she did tarot card readings. This is not okay, you guys. And this is really sad because she has been through so much in these 3 years that physically her body is sick right now. And my prayer is that you will go to Michelle Nimmo on Facebook and you will send her a message. Tell her you're from Unity and tell her and support her. Just tell her thank you for trying to create that space. We love you. We are here for you. She wants to come here. She just isn't healthy enough to do that at this point. If anybody can be there Friday, July 5th at 6 p.m. for the closing of the store, that would be an incredible way to support her. This stuff has to stop. And it's not going to stop if we remain silent. You know, it was interesting. Yesterday, Paul and I worked the first shift at the Metaphysical Fair at Relics Antique Mall on West Battlefield. I encourage you to go. It's still open today. So it was our booth, and thank you, Amy Burnett, for the wonderful Unity logo on our tablecloth. And we had the opportunity to meet so many people. These are our people there. And it was amazing how many people came up and said, I had no idea there was a church like this that existed. Wow. I mean, that's why we're there. It's time for us to be known. So at one point, these two women came up, and they were talking to us, and they noticed our badge. It said Unity, and it was the rainbow, which means we are an ally. And this woman just looked, and she was like, oh my gosh. And I said, oh yeah. And I said, you know, our board president is a lesbian that got married in our church. Our music director is gay. And she busted into tears. I mean, it was immediate. And I just walked around and I said, can I hug you? And I hugged her. And as I look back, her partner is starting to tear up as well. And she just, you know, like she just was crying because they found a place that they hadn't found before where they would be loved and accepted just for who they are. I think how can anybody just dismiss people just for any reason that they want to? And that we have this going on. I know that, you know, one of our board members talked about the first time that they came here and just how walking in they were afraid to hold hands or they were afraid to put their arms around each other because they couldn't do that other places. And how coming here it was like, wow, it's okay. It's not just okay, it's the norm. I mean, anybody should be able to hold hands and put their arm around each other in this place and anywhere that anybody is. This has to stop. Yeah, our LGBT community should not feel segregated in any way, and especially from a church community. Any church community in this city, any church community anywhere, they should not feel excluded from that. I did some research. More than half of transgender male teens who participated in a survey reported attempting suicide in their lifetime. More than half. 41.8% of non-binary youth, and these are youth who don't identify as male or female, 41.8% attempted suicide in their lifetime. And this has to stop. And it only stops if you and I are willing to get into the arena, if we are willing to let our voices to be heard, to live out loud, to stand for proudly. You know, one of the things with the Fillmores that they always talked about was, you know, always find what's in common. I'm going to tell you, I'm not with that anymore. We need to speak our language. We need to stand up when people are saying things. There's no common ground here when it comes to this. There is none. None. So we have to stand together and stand for. So what I want to close with today is I want to close with some words by Bishop John Shelby Spong. Now, John Shelby Spong was a former Episcopalian bishop. He's a theologian and an author. And I'm going to tell you right now that I stand in solidarity with his words. And my hope is that you will also stand in solidarity with his words. He says, I have made a decision. I will no longer debate the issue of homosexuality in the church with anyone. I will no longer engage the biblical ignorance that emanates from so many right-wing Christians about how the Bible condemns homosexuality, as if that point of view still has any credibility. I will no longer discuss with them or listen to them tell me how homosexuality is an abomination of God, about how homosexuality is a chosen lifestyle, or about how through prayer and spiritual counseling, homosexuals can be cured. Those arguments are no longer worthy of my time or energy. I will no longer listen to the thoughts of those who advocate reparative therapy, as if homosexual persons are somehow broken and need to be repaired. I will no longer talk to those who believe that the unity of the church can or should be achieved by rejecting the presence of gay and lesbian people. I will no longer take the time to refute the unlearned and undocumentable claims of certain world religious leaders who call homosexuality deviant. I will no longer listen to the pious sentimentality that certain Christian leaders continue to employ that suggests some version of that strange and overtly dishonest phrase, we love the sinner, but we hate the sin. That statement is, I have concluded, nothing more than a self-serving lie to cover the fact that these people hate homosexual persons and fear homosexuality itself, but somehow know that hatred is incompatible with the Christ they claim to profess. Thus, they adopt this face-saving and absolutely false statement. I will no longer temper my understanding of truth in order to pretend that I have even a tiny smidgen of respect for the appalling negativity that continues to emanate from religious circles where the church has for centuries conveniently perfumed its ongoing prejudices against blacks, Jews, women, and homosexual persons with high-sounding, pious rhetoric. The day for that mentality has quite simply come to an end, and I will personally neither tolerate it nor listen to it any longer. The world has moved on, leaving these elements of the Christian church that cannot adjust to new knowledge or a new consciousness lost in a sea of their own irrelevance. They are no longer talk to anyone but themselves. I will no longer seek to slow down the witness to inclusiveness by pretending that there is some middle ground between prejudice and oppression. There isn't. Justice postponed is justice denied. That can be a resting place no longer for anyone. An old civil rights song proclaimed that the only choice awaiting those who cannot adjust to a new understanding is to roll on over or will roll on over you. Time waits for no one. So I'm asking you today, will you join me? Will you step into the arena? And will you speak? And will you live in a way that our message is so clear that we will not roll over, that we will stand for anyone who is oppressed, but especially today for our LGBTQ community. If you will join me, I'm going to ask you to stand. Take a look around.